trying to go live, but I guess we've got it. So, good morning. It's Tuesday morning of April 4th. And we're just about 15 minutes after adjournment. We didn't adjourn till 11 o'clock. So, we're taking testimony on 472. So welcome you folks from the agency. We run right through, and we have meetings at noon time, but we'll hang right with it and go to noon, and we'll pick up where we stop another day.
Yes, sir.
So, did you have a part in here, I believe, and
Yes.
yes, and yeah.
Okay, Steve Cornell, Vermont Age Agricultural Food Markets. And we're here and at your request to answer questions about the revisions to the apiary law as part of H 472. And, we can discuss it however much detail you want, or we can answer specific questions. So Brooke Decker is here with me. She's our apiary person, your health specialist. So,
well,
yeah,
apiary is pretty important issue to this committee and to our agricultural well-being. And so maybe you could run through the changes that are in here that pertain to it. And they must have been suggested by you folks, and give us an update on the thinking behind those changes.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. The two substantive changes that we wanted to talk about were the changes regarding the health inspection certificate, and then the elimination of the 75-mile exemption. Those were the topics I think you guys had questions about last time. So we can dive right into that. And just so as an overview, those changes were made to bring the law into the way that the apiary industry is working now, as opposed to when the law was originally written, and actually make it easier for the industry and support the industry in what we're trying to do. And so maybe just as a real quick encapsulation, that Brooke can just describe the way the 45-day health certificate process works for sale and also for.
Starting with the traffic and bees section.
Or just how the system works, how you do, what a 45-day health certificate is and how you do it.
Oh, yeah. So the 45-day health certificate is actually comes from statute here. One of the regulations in the import permit states that a valid certificate of inspection is one that's been conducted within 45 days from import. So that's where that 45 days came from for the certificate of inspection for this 3028 that we were requesting some changes to the language. Does that help clarify it, or do we want to talk about how the process works?
So how does the 45-day health certificate work? How do they contact
you?
What
so
do you do?
we have a request an inspection kind of a widget in a form online that beekeepers can go to and request an inspection, and I get an automatic update email, and then I schedule that request. I usually can do it within a week, but sometimes, depending on the severity of the inspection, or, I prioritize regulatory inspections, which would be this traffic and bees inspection. It can get out there pretty quickly. You can schedule it as far as you want in advance, really, but I can fulfill that request pretty quickly, generally. And then I come and do an inspection looking for brood diseases, and then provide a health certificate on the spot. I have a two-part tearaway sheet that has all the inspections, lists everything that I visually inspect. And at the bottom of the sheet, especially in this case of bees for sale, it states that these bees are certified for sale for 45 days.
So the the 45 days was not in the law before, so must be, you put 45, the 45 days piece in there for a reason, and that you said is because that's basically how long it usually takes you to get it?
No, the 45 days was, so it's in, like, what's the word that, it's the same as the health inspection that we require for an import permit. So I could, it's just this is valid, it expires after 45 days. So after I come and inspect these, that certificate expires after 45 days, which is the same language as that import permit. So
2032.
yeah, so, the inspection, so I guess I'm happy to answer a question. I don't want to go too off. So the reasoning behind this request was, primarily this word summer season here, that was stricken because most of the bees are sold in the month of May, somewhat into middle of June. So that is before summer. So summer is summer when it's 80 degrees, or is summer as you go by the calendar or the moon phases or whatever. So this aligns it with what's actually happening, which primarily most of the bees that are sold in the state of Vermont come from Vermont businesses that are migratory. I think we talked about that kind of industry before. They're building their bees up in the south and they bring them up into Vermont and they fill out the import request. They have a valid health certificate, but that health certificate is for all of their bees. So they get to Vermont and then they're selling their bees in Vermont. They've reared them for sale. So I do another inspection on just the bees that are for sale and provide that health certificate. I know, there's maybe 5 people that do this, so it's 5 different operations, and I already know their sale dates, and it's pretty standard, and it's all within those 6 weeks. So it's before the summer. So the idea was to change this so that it fits, that we have this, that it's clear that the bees need to be inspected prior to sale, and then that word summer is just so ambiguous, really, that it fits better with what we're doing.
What you're doing.
Yeah.
And an important point too is that she gives you the certificate on the spot.
Right.
So there's no delay. Once the inspection occurs, you get the certificate. If the bees are okay for sale, you get the certificate there, and that certificate is good for 45 days. And most of the bees are going to be sold within that 45 days, in May or June. If for some reason you don't sell them, then Brooke can go back and give you another one for another 45 days. But there's no hindrance to selling the bees as a result of that change. That makes sense.
And 45 days plus 45 days, if I were to do another inspection, that's the bee season in Vermont. It's so short that it wouldn't be a hindrance if somebody were to continually sell bees throughout the season, but that's not generally the case.
Questions from the
No,
committee?
it's clear.
So the other one was the 75-mile, eliminating the 75-mile exemption from the inspection. And again, large overview, that is to make it the process. It's a confusing process the way it's written, and there's been some misinterpretation by various folks. We want to make it consistent across the board. If you're moving bees, you need a health certificate. Yeah, sorry. You need a health certificate. It's good for 45 days. Same process. Brooke comes out, does an inspection, gives you a certificate. It's good for 45 days. It's consistent with neighboring states. They require a health certificate before you can move material into their state. So it's just part of making the overall purpose of the apiary law is to prevent spread of diseases and to protect the health of the industry and of agriculture and everything else. So it just makes it very clear and consistent. If you're moving your bees, you got to have a health certificate. If we give you on the spot, it's good for 45 days. So it's real straightforward.
Yeah. And so the caveat with that, though, if I may chime in, if you're moving your bees outside of the state, so you don't need a permit to move bees within the state. If you're moving bees within your own apiaries, that you're not crossing state lines. But as soon as you cross state lines, all of the other surrounding states within 75 miles require that. And so part of the issue with this, go ahead, did you want to ask a question or?
Well, 75 miles from the border, right? Or is
That's a
it
good
from your-
question.
Is it from your home base?
Well, that is part of the confusing part of this, is that it says not more than 75 miles from the registered location of the owner of bees. So I don't know what that means, to be
Well,
honest.
I think the reason didn't,
Yeah, I think, remember,
a bee will fly up to
What they say,
10 miles,
8 miles.
8 or 9 miles.
and I think the original 75-mile figure came from a member of the House who lived in Addison County and was moving bees across to New York State. And it worked well for where he lived and where he was going. So in a sense, it was a arbitrary number. I think I'm remembering correctly.
So it might even get out of Vermont and into New York a little bit.
So the issue with that is a misinterpretation that New York doesn't require a health certificate. So that's what was happening, is people didn't think that, but all of our neighboring states within 75 miles, which would include Maine, is 75 miles from some borders of Vermont. I did a little Google Earth. So if you're up in the Northeast Kingdom, right, and you know, so that's potentially could be Maine. But either way, all of those states require an inspection prior to entry to those states. So even if you were moving 75 miles or 200 miles or 4 miles, you still need that. So it's a bit of it appeared to be a loophole to some that they didn't need an inspection into that state.
New York.
Right, primarily New York is where a lot of there's, you know, so close, that's a big ag area, so that's where that kind of, there was thinking of, I don't need an inspection, but in reality they did, and they were breaking, you know, the other
So
states.
New York still doesn't require.
Oh, no, they require it, and I'm very close with that apiary program, and we work together, and they've, you know, we've been trying to work with beekeepers to get them to understand this, and it's confusing for them, and they're like, well, the Vermont law, I'm in Vermont and it says this, but you know, Vermont, any law, right, you cross over, you still have to, as soon as you cross that border, you have to abide by those laws. So New York has expressed concerns that there's confusion within the Vermont law.
So that's best out of there.
Yeah,
And
to keep
Mass requires inspection.
yeah, Mass does, New
And
Hampshire
Hampshire
does,
and Maine.
and Maine, yeah.
What about Quebec?
We cannot, they do not allow bees at all whatsoever into Canada.
The only
It
way
is
is if they fly over the
correct, they could
border.
fly, but if you have an AP, you know, you can't move any bees or equipment, it is a closed border. You can sell queens, but I think it was maybe in the 80s or 90s, that border is closed, and that's a whole other conversation that's happening at a national level, but that's a different story. So no bees are going to Canada.
Well, I wouldn't want my bees going over there, especially when we couldn't go.
Yeah.
Can I intervene a little bit for clarity here? Can I intervene for some clarity here a little bit?
Sure, yeah.
So one of the things with the New York Vermont border is there have in the past and maybe now and maybe in the future, there's beekeepers who operate in both states. I don't myself, but I know this has existed before. And you get into situations where you might be pollinating an apple orchard or something, and then you're say you're doing it in New York, you have bees in New York, you have bees in Vermont, you're bringing those bees after, they might have come from both places. You're bringing them back into an apiary in Vermont, perhaps after the pollination to put your yards there. So there are some pretty gray like areas. It's usually, I think, been worked out with just communication with the state bee inspector. Overall, and especially when it's within an operation, you all have to understand that it's within our best interest to control disease in our bees, especially American foul brood, which is really what this is all about. So an operation within itself, I don't need the state to come burn my hives. I'll have burned them already if I find ABF in my hives, because I certainly do not want it to spread around my operation. So it's not like it's I don't know. It's not like, the government has to say we have to do that. That's common practice to do that in order to keep the disease out of your own operation. So that's where I think the 75 miles came from and things. I know that Peter Janier used to operate in both states. Mike Palmer used to operate in both states. So I think that's where this could get a little gray, but it's absolutely right that,
They should be inspected.
well, it's going to get a little difficult when it's within the existing operation. The inspections are really, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of them are concerned more with when you're selling bees and nucleus colonies. And often they're coming from way farther than New York. In fact, they're coming from the South. So I don't really have a suggestion how to look at this, but if you're within one apiary's, area, and it's that same person moving bees between New York State and Vermont for themselves, I don't know how you want to apply that, because that's a logistics type, that's a messy situation. It's not, like you say, the bees don't know the borders anyway here. So, but it's within an operation. So you have the beekeeper has a self-discipline to keep these diseases under control. He's not going to get them into his own operation, especially a commercial beekeeper. And I don't think this is you don't have hobbyists doing this. It's not.
So how does it work for the people selling bees? So,
Well, just as Brooke has described. So those bees, Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, they're inspected within 45 days prior to coming to Vermont. And then I think you inspect them within 10 days of being here, Brooke, is that right?
No, just prior to sale. Sorry, I can't see your face.
Yeah, sorry, prior to sale. And a lot can happen in 45 days in a beehive, first of all, but the trick is to have them inspected by the inspector of the state they're coming from prior to their going out of state for sale.
and we do that. If we have a beekeeper that's selling bees, you go and.
Yeah, that's in statute.
Yep.
Yeah, that's in statute. We go and we have basically trained the beekeeper, people who are buying bees to ask for that health certificate.
And if a child wanted to buy bees from Timbuktu out of state, he would have to supply you with a certificate that they've been, so we're
Yeah, and
pretty
he
well
has. He knows
covered.
that process. We've worked on that, and they weren't from Timbuktu, though. I don't think, were they, Chats?
Yeah, it'll never happen again. They don't work out. My own bees are my own bees as far as I'm concerned.
They were from Timbuktu.
Yeah, they maybe were from Timbuktu then.
No, they're from the South, and that's the biggest problem, I think.
Yeah,
But I think if I could, I think what Chaz was saying kind of solidifies the confusion of there are operations that operate across state lines.
Yeah.
If you're moving any equipment into or bees into New York, you still need that. It doesn't matter if you have an operation partially based in Vermont and in New York. New York still requires you to get an inspection.
yeah.
So that's where the confusion is, and the law as it's written says that this is this certain criteria where the bees are registered in Vermont, they go to New York or wherever, so we'll just use New York because it's a good example, for 30 days, and then they come back. That's exempt. What isn't exempt are bees that are registered in New York that come to Vermont or back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's not what this says in my interpretation, but I'm not a lawyer, but it says they're registered in Vermont. So to me, that says they're registered in Vermont, they go somewhere and then they come back. So they would still need that inspection though, if they're going into, sorry, I used Vermont instead of New York, but
Yeah.
hopefully you follow. But they would still need that if you're doing those, or if you're,
Each time.
each time, yeah, but if you're repopulating, let's say you have your new, however you're repopulating your New York operation, you would need an inspection. And I've done these. It's easy. It's the same process as everything else. I'm taking these 50 colonies over to New York. I provide that to New York and to the beekeeper, and they're valid to go. So it's the same thing, and it's not a burden. It doesn't cost any money. And it's a good way with this now. We don't like, because of the confusion of the moving back and forth, we don't know what's happening, because beekeepers think they don't have to tell us now
So
because
if
it's
this
confusing.
is out of there, it'll cut out some of that.
Yeah,
It'll
yeah.
probably take a couple of years to
Yeah,
get
we do.
people.
Yeah.
tuned in.
back into, but there's, like Chaz said, it's not the backyard beekeepers that are moving bees for us, it's the bigger operations,
Yeah.
of which there's probably 10 big ones that are possibly, in that situation, maybe even 5, and that's, very few, so the education will be fairly easy.
Now, your agency or your department will send the Beekeepers Association a letter on the change in the law, so that it'll be understandable for them not to get caught in the middle.
Yeah, and I've actually talked with them. I sit on their board as an advisory person, and I have talked with them about the changes because they get, they pay attention to all this stuff. And from what I heard from them, I don't want to speak for them, but from what I've heard from them, they understand that the confusion that it causes, that it can, I think the intent was, as Chaz described, was to somehow help the beekeepers that are bordering states, but we also can't jurisdict in New York to what they, that's their laws. So as far as I know, the Beekeeping Association, the people I've talked to, and when I presented my reasoning for bringing this up, I didn't hear any concerns. They understood where I was coming from. So.
Well, hopefully, we get that out there, clarify anything and cut out any misunderstanding.
It just makes it simpler.
Yeah,
Are there
simple is better.
any other parts of the apiaries that in here that you want to comment on?
I think that was it. Those were the big, really change. Otherwise, it was just language changing, like making things
clean.
gender neutral and clearing up some modern, using modern language.
And Charles, did you have any other concerns with the way this apiaries part is written?
You're muted, Chaz.
So it's been a while since I've had a chance to read this whole thing over, and it's what I'm referring to is not the changes suggested necessarily, though. And so I don't want to take too much about, but maybe something in the future that's looked at. Disease is used very liberally in the law, and you're referring to the state where you might burn colonies, and that's really only American foul brood is the only instance you might burn colonies. And as it reads, there's a lot of bee diseases, unfortunately, today, and the way it reads, you could technically be, if somebody couldn't correct another disease in the bees, they could, you're giving yourself the power to burn bees that would have something other than ABF, and that would be really problematic. I'm not saying it would ever happen, but I don't think you need to give yourself that type of authority over the bees when it's only American foul brood ABF that is where you would have to destroy beehives to control the spread of disease.
Yeah.
And if there was ever one in the future that qualified, that you could add it. You have that in there.
I could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't have the definitions in front of me, but we do only currently categorize American foul brood as this disease that's to be eradicated. We don't know what diseases are coming. There's a lot of talk around the world actually about a Turpii-Laelaps mite that potentially could come to North America, and mitigation plans that might happen with that. So
But Brooke, that's not a disease, it's a pest. And then it's just language I'm talking about here. So, and it does allow the secretary to adopt an additional disease. Like if something came along similar to ABF, where you needed to destroy hives to control it, you could adopt that law. That's here in the written thing. You could adopt that disease as well. But it really should be in a lot of these areas where it refers to disease, it should refer specifically to American foul brood and ABF, or ABF, which is what that stands for.
But if it's more general, and the secretary has the authority, it would be a heck of a lot quicker and faster to put a stop to it than if you get it written down in stone where you can't move, I would think. You'd want to keep it as flexible as you could. So, because the way I understand it, and the only thing I know about bees is I don't like getting stung by them, and I like honey. But if you're only using them 40, 50, 60 days a season, you want, and if you track some kind of a disease, I would think you'd want to get onto that pretty quick to eradicate it.
Right, but the only disease that is known to bees that you need to destroy the colony, okay, by actually burning the equipment and the bees, is American foul brood. You wouldn't be in that situation with any other bee disease. You have all kinds of other bee diseases, deformed wing virus, that do not equate to that. And you kind of.
I think I don't have the definitions in my printout, but there's reference to, if I'm recalling correctly, a severe disease, which is where that American foul brood comes in. So I think there's like that word before it, and that's where the secretary can determine. And so far, we've only determined that the secretary can regulate that one disease. We don't know what's coming in the future, but the secretary has that power to determine that this is a huge health concern.
So it isn't general powers, it's specific.
It is on, I believe, just with this being partial, I know that there's a word serious, but the definition of disease does include pests and parasites, which from my perspective, from the apiary, inspector or pollinator health specialist, keeping it broad is good. So if a pest or a parasite came in, we could quarantine.
Right.
We're not just. I think the fear is that we would come in and just start burning all the colonies, and that's what happened in Australia when they just got a pest, and that didn't go well. And so the Apiary Inspectors of America, and we talk about this a lot. Like, that is not the way to go. That is not what we want to do. We do not want to, destroy an industry or create chaos or anything.
With just one of you, you can't do it too quick.
Right,
not exactly.
I'm just saying somebody should read through it to look at that, and I think you can make the language much clearer there. You have the ability to adopt if something additional comes along existing, but it shouldn't just include any bee disease out there. That's all.
Yeah. Well, maybe, maybe we could get some clarifying language from Brooke or Steve, and you could, offer your suggestions to them, and if that needs, if you feel that needs changing? 'Cause
It's simpler than that, Anson. It's just a matter of somebody reading through it and realizing that, maybe it should specifically say American foul brood instead of disease.
If I can make a suggestion, so take this concern back, take a look at it. We can talk about it with the DBA.
Yeah,
And we can come back. I mean, it's not part of the housekeeping bill now, obviously, but we can certainly consider it, kick it around.
well,
Consider it.
talk with the association.
Right.
Yeah.
The next round of changes.
Get them on board and, yeah.
So one other comment, that I think, we have these laws about apiary, the number of hives in an apiary in order for it to be considered a 2-mile apiary law and things. I think really we should look at special circumstances. We're a 92-year-old apiary going into the 4th generation now, and we normally keep 40 colonies of bees in approximately 28, 30 locations. And we've had devastating problems, as you well know, I hope. And keeping those numbers in bee yards is difficult in the situation we're in now. And I would hate to see bee yards, commercial bee yards especially, forfeited because the beekeeper, as myself in the last 2 years, has had their colonies reduced, by 50%. And we've had to consolidate bee yards and things like that for simple things like time and gas and this type of thing. But this is kind of a special circumstance that we're in. And I think, the law is written like, okay, if you don't have at least, 15 hives for 2 years, you're subject to lose your location. And that's a bit difficult. For us, we are truly a Vermont business. Our bees live here all year round. Okay, we winter in Vermont, we do and so on. A migratory beekeeper coming out of the south and raising nukes and things can certainly fill up their bee yards with bees coming from out of state and having the advantage of raising nucleus colonies in the south. I don't know if you understand this all without getting into beekeeping so well, but I'm here. I have to do it all. I do it all within Vermont. Okay, we raise our bees in the spring. We bring them up. We are losing bees all season in the winter as well, and then we have to maintain these numbers in our bee yards. And we've gone from 1,200 to 320 colonies over the years, which is a pretty big spread. So in my situation, and I think others, we have circumstance where we are not maintaining or cannot keep those colonies in those yards necessarily for a 2-year time period, but we have no intention of giving up that territory, in that our intention is to get back to 1,000 colonies and put bees back in those areas. And when a company like mine who's been doing it 92 years, I think there should be some recognition of that.
Who knows that other than you, how many bees you've got there?
I report it to the state every year, the number of colonies that we have in those registered areas as per this law.
I think this is where we could.
Yeah, and I can speak to a little bit how that works. So someone would have to petition for that area. Someone would have to ask me, let's say like they heard through the grapevine that Chaz isn't using, these yards anymore, or there's no bees there. They would petition the state and there would be a process for that. So it's not an automatic loss of the locations. There would be.
It's not, but it gives the state the authority to take or to reissue my spot to another beekeeper.
does in some, I mean, this hasn't happened. I've had one petition in the state where this happened and a beekeeper died actually. And it was an abandoned apiary that someone took over actually. So it wasn't a situation. But if I'm reading this, that there's kind of some back and forth. So you have 2 years. So basically, let's say Chaz isn't using this location. So anyone can petition the state and establish the apiary. Sorry, I'm not reading well, but so get 2 years. So there's a petition. There's a 2-year time that Chaz would get this notification that says someone wants this yard. Can you put 15 or whatever number colonies there? You know, basically, do you want to build it back up? And you have 2 years to build it up. So there would be a signal. There's no automatic. You don't have 15, you've got it, you know, it's gone. So there's a 2-year period to build back up. And then, you know.
But why couldn't you move your bees from, if you had 2 little yards?
Yeah, move it to that
move
one.
them all to 1 yard, that's only 1 year. Then next year you could move them back to the other yard and have the other one empty.
Yeah.
And you're only.
Yeah, potentially you could have 15 hives.
Answer, we got a lot to do besides move bees around to maintain hive yard locations. I have to say that. You know, that's why I just think that should be looked at, and there should be clarity and maybe some special circumstance under it, because bees are in a very much a special circumstance with this. Hopefully in the future, you'll help with that special circumstance and get the neonicotinoid seed coatings that are not of any benefit to the farmers and are just destroying our environment out of the system. And that will certainly improve the situation. But until the legislature is willing to make that move, we're going to continue to have these die-offs if we have since they've been here. And we're doing everything to mitigate that, and it's extremely expensive and it's extremely difficult to survive in this business under these circumstances. But I myself will not give up a bee location because I haven't been able to keep bees in there because my bees are getting devastated because of the environment we're in now in Vermont. And I think there should be clarity to put to this, because that helps avoid confusion, that helps avoid lawsuits or whatever. And I think as a law, that's pretty much what you intend to do. So it should be, I think there should be a clause in there for special circumstances where an organization or an apiary was unable to live up to this, whether it's 2 years or 3 years. Some of these locations have been in my apiary for 80 years. Okay, and I'm not going to lose a location like that when I can't keep enough bees in there, because I've had to reduce my, say, 30 locations to 20 just to save on diesel fuel and time with the men that we have and women we have to work those bees. And, you know, this is a circumstance. We weren't losing 20 years ago 50% of our bees. We were losing under 10% of our bees. And we lost bees in the winter, primarily, with very few losses in the summer. So this is very much a special circumstances throughout our whole history of beekeeping in this state, which goes way back to the time our government was formed. There were bees here. And those, you know, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but.
Well, we could, an easy change would be to help without digging or drilling way down. An easy way to fix that for the time being would be to change 2 to a 3. And it would give you guys an opportunity to work up some language that would be more suited to cover the situation. If we made it instead of 2 years, 3 years, if we don't, we've only had one anyways.
Well, in my 4 years here, so, you know, I don't, I haven't been around forever, but it's not a common thing. But, you know, as the industry grows, it could become more common. I can't predict the future, but there's a potential that,
But we do, I mean,
There's potential that Vermont beekeepers who are here, which is like myself, but certainly not only myself, who winter here, are put under a lot of pressure from migratory beekeepers that come here only in the summertime.
well,
Okay.
we want to keep you guys healthy, but if you can't do the job I mean, you have to get your stuff pollinated at a given time and to get the crops. If you really can't cover the pollinating, then we have to get people or let people in from elsewhere.
No, it's not an issue of pollinating. That's not the issue. Yeah,
Oh, what?
Yeah.
what-
the pollination is done. That's a separate issue. It's keeping bees here during the summer months
Yeah,
and needing locations for those bees to make a honey crop. And having the existing beekeepers here who winter here and so on have their existing yards, and you could jeopardize those positions of those beekeepers who've had those yards for long times, often losing those beehives because we're in the situation we are here in the state of Vermont. And what I was saying before, that the situation we're in now is we've never experienced in the history of keeping bees in Vermont. Okay, we're losing bees at rates that are just way beyond anything in our history. Okay, and we could say, oh, we'll get it over in 3 years, but until that circumstance really changes, okay, and until the pesticide situation gets under control, that may not change. And that's only going to change when that situation gets under control. And then we can go back to keeping healthy bees. We can have our healthy bees, native pollinators, and we will have no problem running 1,000 to 1,200 hives when we're not losing 50% of them a year.
well, yes.
Yeah, so Senator, if I may, this is actually a complex issue.
Yeah,
The
it
issue
sounds
of-
like
of
it
the
is.
Establishing a group, we have a number of, considerations I have to take into account when doing this. So this could be another opportunity to take this back and consider some changes to it. I understand what Mr. Mraz is saying about special circumstances and there may be a way to accommodate that, but we would have to think and discuss this with a lot of folks before we make any kind of change, because this affects a lot of people.
And this bill doesn't change, if most of what we're talking about is already existing law.
Yeah.
This bill doesn't substantially change what's already going on.
No, but what Mr. Mraz is asking for is for
Okay.
some consideration. And what I'm saying is, let's go back and talk about it.
Okay.
And, we'll have.
Well, I think to get it resolved, yeah, you gotta get the other guys in on this and figure it out.
Right, it's a complex.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I think there's a lot of different parts to it.
Yeah, and a lot of people would want to talk to a lot of people about it before making a change.
my family,
Yes, I'm not suggesting making a change. I'm suggesting it should be looked at in the future. And I appreciate the opportunity to make that statement. I know you're looking at only the pages in the law, but we have a very robust Vermont Beekeepers Association. There's plenty of people to talk to and review these things, and other beekeepers that would be happy to get involved. But I think it is a valid point on my part that we're under a special circumstance here in beekeeping right now.
well, I think Brian's gonna leave, and I think we're in pretty good shape with what we had for questions, and you folks have got a couple of issues to go back and work on. And so thanks for
Thank you.
your time, and sorry well, I guess you guys didn't have to wait too long because we had you set up But, and thanks, Charles, is it Charles or Chaz?
Charles, Chaz? No
Yeah,
problem, either one.
whatever, right?
Thank you, Anson. Thank you for having me.
Dinner.
That's
Okay,
Thank you for your time.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Senator.
Appreciate it.